Thanks for joining us today for Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We are uncovering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. As you know, the DFARS are the rulebooks for contracting with the Defense Department, and we have been moving sequentially. We started with DFARS Part 201 in January, and we will be finishing with Part 253 in December. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 450 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you do have questions for our speaker, we will have her information on the last slide of the presentation today. A special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veteran Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSBC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans. Please visit their website for more information. Virginia PTAC at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the link provided to explore what PTACs can offer. Set Aside Alert provides up-to-date news, information, and opportunities for small business federal contractors. Their daily opportunities alerts assure you won't miss important sources sought and solicitation announcements, providing details so you can jump on the hot ones. Every 2 weeks, they deliver concise breaking news, events, regulations, and teaming opportunities. Also, please join the Reston Chamber of Commerce Government Contractors Council for regular meetings. Also, please stay tuned for information on their very popular B2G conference in May. Please contact Alicia Fields with the email shown on the screen if you have any questions. Federal contracting is a relationship game. Now get in front of your federal human sooner with the exclusive Players and Layers method from Judy Bratt in Summit Insight. Connect with her on LinkedIn and find out more, or visit growfedbiz.com today. VentureX Arlington is a brand new flexible office space provider designed primarily for government contractors to scale up and down based on their business needs. Flexible term leases from 1 month to long term. Engaging open spaces, cafe, and conference rooms. Exceptional IT security. Please visit the website shown on the screen for more information. Also, if you are interested in selling to the federal government, you may need a contract vehicle. The most popular one is the GSA schedule. Learn more about the requirements, the proposal process, and how this contract vehicle may or may not be the right tool for you. Jennifer Schaus is teaching a series of several classes, as you can see here, with the Virginia PTAC and Mary Washington University. All classes are listed on our website under the events section with the registration link. Okay, and now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. More information can be found on our website. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach over 23,000 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us for pricing information with the email shown on your screen. I also wanted to inform you of a new series that we have this year. We have launched a monthly series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. This is a live webinar series held each month, and these will take place on the second Friday of each month this year in 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen and then take your live questions about that topic. So for example, our panelists covered OTA in February, And this Friday, on March 12th, our panelists will be covering bid protests. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals. You can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available. Please email hello@jenniferschaus.com for our media kit with pricing details. Also, please note that you can use code DFARS for an additional $15 discount on each webinar. Okay, now to introduce our speaker, Joanna Reed. Welcome, Joanna. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Good afternoon. I am a small business attorney out in Reston, Virginia. Our law firm specializes in helping small and medium-sized businesses win their way through the government contracting arena. We also have a couple of attorneys who specialize more in corporate law, but again, within the framework of government contracts. And on that note, I'd like to move to the next slide. We're going to be talking about market research today. One of the interesting things about the DFARS 210 clause and market research in general is that in many organizations, both within the government and in private industry, and I've been in both arenas over my career, it tends to get a lot of short shrift. And how short it becomes and how much it is not used properly shows up generally in the protest arena, where you have a company protesting the fact that they did not get a contract or they were not invited to submit a proposal or something similar to that. And the reason for that was because the government wasn't aware that that company provided that service. Had the government did proper market research, they would have found that out. Market research is a requirement on the government, although it has to be set up as the size of the market research and the amount of market research that is done needs to be set forth basically more along the lines of what is the size of the project. The bigger the project, the more market research that needs to be done. The smaller the project, less market research. Next slide. So before we get too far, what is market research? Market research is defined as a collection and analysis of product or service market information from a variety of sources in order to determine the best approach for acquiring goods and services to satisfy a party's needs. What does that mean? Basically, it's let's go out, let's take a look at what is in the marketplace. And by that, generally, we're talking the commercial marketplace, but not necessarily. It might be if we're in the government sphere. Who else within the government is buying something similar? Can something that somebody else is making, maybe specific for one government customer, be used for a different customer, but in a different manner with some small changes? All of that's part of what market research is. And as I indicated, it should be commensurate with the dollar value of the project. Next slide. The clause of the DFARS, Part 210, really amends FAR 10.001 for DoD. And for your information, at the back of the slide deck, there are a number of background slides, not the least of which is the text of FAR 10.001. And it's in addition, it says that agencies shall conduct market research appropriate to the circumstances for issuing a solicitation with a tiered evaluation of offers, and use the results of the market research to determine whether the criteria in FAR Part 19. So the additional language primarily here, when we're talking about I, A, and B, is what are the small business opportunities, which is where Part 19 comes in, that could be used because there's still a maximize. We want to use as much small business as possible, as well as using as much commercial stuff as possible. And looking to see whether it's a sufficient number of qualified small business concerns available to justify limiting the competition under the terms of the contract. And if the contracting officer cannot make that determination, then they have to include in the file a written explanation as to why the determination cannot be made. And once again, this public law is in the back of the slide deck. Next slide. One of the other uses of market research is to inform price reasonableness. And finally, there's additional notice requirements for the bundling notification of publications. So basically this is dealing with the fact that there's a lot of contracts out that instead of being 10 small contracts to purchase something, they will bundle together to make a larger contract. You see this a lot also when we start talking about the government-wide purchase agreements, the GWACs. You see this using the GSA schedule, all of those, that's what they're talking about. 210.002, the procedures, it basically says you need to rely on this PGI 210.7.070 for the Market Research Report Guide for improving the trade graph in services acquisition. There's another PGI 210.002, and then you're supposed to be following those with contract file documentation. If you were to follow these links, I will tell you, you will never find these documents. The only place these documents are these days is at the DAU, which is the Defense Acquisition University, and you have the link here. In fact, if you really wanted to look for most of these documents, because they have moved the stuff within the DFARS system, it's just not going to be there. Next slide. So if you look at PGI 210.002 procedures, one of the things they request that they require contracting officers to do is to retain the information for potential offers that express an interest in an acquisition. So the idea is that contracting officers should get a collection of potential offerors that they can then go back to and talk to in seeing whether or not there is, in fact, an offeror or multiple offerors who might be able to satisfy the government's requirements. The other piece on the procedures, if you look at little triple I, is the things that they need to include in the contract file. For one, the method used to conduct the market research, the time frame in which the market research conducted. If we're talking about a weapon system, if you have market research that was done 10 years ago, it might still actually be valid. If we're talking about information systems and you have market research that was done 10 years ago, highly unlikely that that's still going to be valid market research. What were the capabilities? Who identified? What were the capabilities identified of the potential resources? Have they stayed somewhat similar to what they were before? One of the other things that that the government might want to annotate is we go through periods and it's waning and increasing as time goes by. But companies join other companies, companies buy other companies. So you might have the capability of a potential resource that you have the name of the company today, but they've been bought by somebody else. So if you annotate into the file the fact that that's happened, the chances are that will be more useful information and to keep the information more useful. And finally, any conclusions that were reached as part of the market research analysis. Next slide. So why have market research? There's a lot of reasons. One, and this seems kind of obvious, what is the marketplace capability? I used to work on a project that I was in-house counsel at BAE Systems, and we were looking to change the requirements of one of the vehicles that was being built. And one of the things that this to me as a non-technical person seemed somewhat obvious, but it was something that kept going back and forth with regard to the government was, if you add more armor to a vehicle, you will increase the weight. If you increase the weight, you need a bigger engine to run the device. Seemed obvious to me. At some point, the size of the engine becomes too big for the space in which it's supposed to be on. And then the only way you can meet the requirements of the contract, it might actually be impossible. It might be a physical impossibility to have an engine large enough to fit within certain size constraints of a vehicle to go forth. Just take an obvious thing. I'm going to go back a few years, but there used to be a car called a Yugo. These were European made, mostly from the Eastern European bloc. And if you ever saw one, you'd think basically it was a lawnmower with a cab on it. Clearly, you're not going to be able to put a V8 engine into a Yugo. It physically will not work. And quite frankly, also the strain of the size of the engine and going those kinds of speeds, the Yugo probably would have flown out parts everywhere. But that's one of the things you're looking at when you're looking at trying to determine what the marketplace capability is. Going back into looking at IT, for example, for the longest time, you think about the size of computers. I mean, what we do on our phones today used to take computers that were about the size of a city block. Today, is that marketplace capability there to make our size, which I find very interesting. We've gone from small phones, really big phones, to small phones, and now we're going back to big phones. But look at the marketplace capability. What can they do? And it's one thing to say that you're on the bleeding edge of technology. It's another thing to think that you're going to order something that is already fallen off the edge of the cliff. Market research can help the government, or really even a prime contractor with their subcontractors, try and come up with the requirements in terms that the industry understands. There's a lot pushing for commercial buying, and that's one of the ways you can do that. Increased competition, that one is fairly obvious. There's an express requirement for the use of more small businesses. Everywhere you look, if you look at how much small businesses employs versus large businesses, small business employs more people overall than large businesses do. Understanding of costs. It's very interesting. We're in the process of trying to renovate our bathroom upstairs. I kept being asked, what's my budget? But the reality is that I didn't know what a budget was because I had no idea of what it should cost to do it. Looking at what subcontract opportunities. There's a FAR clause that requires large businesses to do market research to determine what subcontract opportunities might be out there. Conflict of interest. Notwithstanding the fact that that seems to be on the wane of looking at, conflict of interest is still an important thing to look at. What is commercially available when we talk about a type of contract and clauses? Is the government or anybody willing to pay for more warranty? And warranty has a cost. What about intellectual property or IP concerns? Is what is out there available commercially? And if it's available commercially, will we have any rights to the intellectual property? Will the government have rights to the intellectual property? Look at whether something is commercial or non-commercial. Is it available? As I've indicated several times, buying things commercial is preferred, but not everything that the government does can be bought commercial. But maybe it's something that it's close to what the government needs, and the commercial product can be slightly changed. Look at whether the government has stuff already in its arsenal, in its warehouses, that they can provide as government furnished property or a government furnished resource. That's usually something that's also out there, quite frankly. Next slide. So before you have any market research, there's things you need to do that is what we were going to call pre-market research. It's one thing to sit there and say, I'm going to do market research. It's another thing to sit there and say, what am I looking for? You can't just go out there and, well, you can, it doesn't do a lot of good, but basically, what is the government's requirements? If I am buying a vehicle, and I think cars is just a great example to use for stuff, if I'm buying a vehicle that I need to carry 3 people around, my requirement's going to be very different than if I'm buying a vehicle that needs to carry 6 people. When you think about going out and buying a car, do you have 2 kids or do you have 3 kids? Or in my case, I have 3 dogs. I need something that'll hold all of them. And I can guarantee you the nicest, coolest convertible out there won't work. Again, looking about the commerciality. Is there stuff out there? Are there sources out there that can provide it from commercial? If you cannot buy something from a commercial entity, not commercial entity, but buy a commercial product, you actually have, the government has to actually do a justification as to why they're not doing commercial. How do you want this thing to perform? If we look at a lot of electric cars, and electric cars, you have to take a certain amount of time to sit and plug them in and charge them up. If all I'm doing is driving locally from here to the grocery store, that works well because I can plug it in at home. But if I'm driving across the country on a regular basis, do I have time to take 2 to 3 hours while my car charges because it won't go a full day? So what are the performance requirements? What's the environment of that product? There's a very different, the laptop that I can buy that I'm going to have in my office is going to be a very, very different laptop than I'm going to want to have if I'm one of these people that take laptops out on hikes. We want something a little bit sturdier. Again, looking, has the product been purchased before? Who's the incumbent? How was it purchased before? The prior providers of the product, how do they perform? Was it a major issue for the government to get the company to provide the service or product, or was it a very seamless effort? What do the files contain? And I will tell you, one of the biggest problems with addressing that issue is no one knows where the files really are. I was working as a consultant at the FAA, and we had a FOIA request come in. I was as a consultant with the contracts department. We had a FOIA request to come in for a particular contract. The contract had been closed for about 2 years, or maybe only about 6 months. Maybe it had been closed about 6 months. And I got tasked with actually finding where that contract physically was located in the files, the file room. And it turned out, once the contract had been closed up, it had been boxed up, shoved in the back corner of the file room, and we won't discuss how many hours I spent trying to find that. Now, and you think, okay, well, great, now we have everything electronic. It doesn't help the problem, oddly enough. What lessons have been learned from prior procurements? Next slide. So where do you go to get your market research? This is a list. This is a list. Some of them are fairly obvious, a specialized catalog. Some not so obvious. Looking at a professional organization. What about your own government experts if you are a government agency? The government, most DoD especially, but some of the other agencies do too, they have what's called national labs. These national labs are government experts that the government can go to at any point in time and get help from. Talk to the contracting officers and contract specialists. You need to talk to small business specialists. Who out there within your agency, or quite frankly, if you're a company listening to this, who within your company has that information? And even if you're a small company, you probably have a few people that have worked a bunch of different places, and they may be surprising to know where they can find information. Surveys. Every day we see marketplace surveys out there. There are also a couple of government databases, such as SAM, the SBA, GSA, etc. And last but not least, but one thing I think that is very, very important, is internet research. Personally, I love Google. Sometimes I get really good results, sometimes I don't. Next slide. Some other areas, posting of special notes in the Fed's BizOps site. They talked about last month that there was a presentation on OTAs. Most OTAs, whether they're coming directly out of the federal government or whether they're coming through one of the consortiums or one of the OTA management companies, will actually post and upload to a lot of different areas, not the least of which Fed BizUp, Fed Registers, and other DoD websites, that they have an interest in a particular topic area. And that companies who have any kind of knowledge or interest in that area should contact and submit questions or submit a white paper to show how they have that area there. So that's another area for market research. implement your academic trade websites and journals. Now, I'm going to make the one caveat because I do advise clients on ITAR. When you're going to academia, you have to be very, very careful that you do not violate any ITAR, mostly because a lot of academia is not what they call U.S. persons, and there will be probably, I'm sure, a discussion of that at some point in one of the Jennifer Schaus's presentations. Finally, interactive web-based technology to expand the reach of the exchange. Next slide. When I teach, and this is not, I teach for this organization and some other, I've done some presentations like this, and one of the things that I make repeatedly as a comment is document, document, document. We go out, we do a lot of work for a lot of different things, we get a lot of information, we don't write it down, we don't document it, and then later two things happen. One, we can't remember what we heard before, which is one problem, but sometimes what's almost worse than that, we think we heard something, but we didn't really hear that. So you really need to document it. And also the DFARS clause does require the government to document what they came up with as their market research. Some of the things that you're supposed to include in there, one is what was the process you used in your market research, and then you have to summarize the analysis and provide recommendations for the acquisition strategy to pursue, any potential existing contract vehicles, the recommendations on improvements to the quality and thoroughness of the government's technical performance documents, what risks should be considered as part of the source selection activities, any specific contract terms and conditions, or OCI, or intellectual property, and then, is there any government-furnished material, equipment, or information, or real property requirements? Next slide. So earlier I told you that in the DFARS, they do list this market research report. And this market research report, when you can go into it, you can actually see what the tool says. But what's also interesting is also at DAU, they have a word-based document that anybody, it's designed obviously for the government, but anybody can go in and you can look at filling in to help you with your market research. So, and what they've done is it's in Word, and for example, under market research objectives, this is what they've written as the support underneath this. You just delete it and you just fill in the blanks. For guidance, this template is based on the March 2017 DoD Market Research Report Guide for improving the trade graph and services acquisition. This template is for multifunctional teams used in conjunction with the guide in performing and documenting their market research efforts. So you have a guidance section. Underneath that, you've got FOUO guidance, and anyone who is working in DoD right now is should hopefully be very, very familiar with the new program that is being implemented, CMMC. And under that, one of the things that would fall under that is FOUO. And so they give you guidance in here that you have to determine whether the FOUO is applicable. They give you the DoD guidance document, and dealing with controlled unclassified information. It's a 2012 document. I believe that document has been updated. They give you a link to the guide, to the FOUO guidance source. I would be very careful with those kind of links. And then they give you instructions. This template contains areas with black, blue, and red text. The black text is fixed and should not be edited. The areas with blue text are placeholders and should be edited appropriately with your specific details. The red text provides instructions, considerations, etc. that will not be retained in the final report. Fill in all the blue areas as applicable and delete all the red text areas. And then finally, they have some references. So under general, they have a part 1, general information, where they have the author, report name, organization, report title, estimated value. And then the next one they have under this one is market research objectives. And what they include in there is, again, it's in red text. You click on the blue text there, and in red text they have some suggested lines of inquiry in support of market research outcomes. And it's the kind of things that I just showed you before and what you should be looking at when you're documenting the document. Increased competition, small participation things. As you can tell from this list here, they really do have a pretty broad base. So you've got the service description, which is basically what are you supposed to be doing the markets research on? What is the background of the entire procurement that they're doing the market research on? What's the potential supplier information? And they have a chart that's a very cool chart that, as an example to use, that has the vendor name, the location, point of contact, capability, and then notes, which says, talk about what you did with this particular vendor name. What techniques were used? And we described a bunch of those above. What small business opportunities are there? Is there an issue with the Ability One or federal prison, et cetera, program? Next slide. Part 2 is your detailed market and industry analysis. What are the requirements that you need for the performance? What was the market intelligence analysis? So here, kind of the guidance under that section. Describe any available commercial factors. What is the availability of the service? What is the demand for the service? And again, this one is directed to services. What is the industry experience level for this service? How many suppliers are in the market, and what is the market share? What is the government market share leverage in the marketplace? If the government does not have much leverage in the marketplace, and it's something that's commercial, clearly they're going to have to go more toward the commercial terms and conditions. If they're a prime player in the marketplace, they can definitely go more toward government, traditional FAR and DFAR terms and conditions. What is the small business footprint? What socioeconomic entities participate in this market, such as 8A, historically underused business zone, service disabled? What is the structure of the supply chain? What is supply chain? What is the pricing structure? And it goes on with a bunch of more items. Finally, part 3 is you need to document what your conclusions and recommendations are. And again, some of the guidance. What acquisition strategy should be used to pursued? What are the potential existing contract vehicles that might satisfy the requirements? What recommendations are there for improvements to the quality and thoroughness of the government's technical performance documents? What are the relevant risks to be considered as part of the source selection activities? Specific contract terms and conditions, OCI concerns, IP, government furnished property. All of these are things to listen to. And that's what's done for the services. And there's a similar document that actually covers both services and products. Next slide. So the document that's the market research report, again, even though it's referenced other places, it is really only at the Defense Acquisition University that you can find this right now. Again, very similar types of information, although slightly less specific, and also slightly less informative of what you can have for doing this. So, for example, where I talked about the market analysis and some of the things to be considered, under this one you have identifying commercial specifications or industry standards is a central activity. Evaluate the availability of commercial or non-developmental items. It provides the basis for finalizing the requirements, developing a product description, determining logistics support, training, etc., and determining whether to use FAR Part 12 versus FAR Part 15, the commerciality decision. Other things you're going to look for in there. Again, you want to know what are you buying? What are your requirements? Has there been a vendor survey? I strongly recommend companies to submit responses to requests for information or RFIs. A lot of times that can influence what and how they are going to ultimately have the product that they're using. And if you can influence them If you provide something very, very special, and you can influence the requirements, and by the way, that's perfectly legit, perfectly legal, it has no OCI issues, that might benefit your product over your competitor's product, why not do that? Next slide. Again, the same kinds of things. What are the commercial opportunities? What are the industry standards? What small business opportunities are there? What terms and conditions? Again, the more that the marketplace that you have in the greater the government's influence in the marketplace, the more the terms and conditions can reflect a more traditional FAR Part 15 type procurement. What conclusions and recommendations? What market research techniques were used? And we've talked about a number of those. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. As was indicated earlier, I do work for a small business advising small, medium-sized companies, and I can be reached at this email address that is here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. The recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. And please join us next week as we uncover more parts of the DFARS.